The environmental agenda now before the Congress includes laws to deal with water pollution, pesticide hazards, ocean dumping, excessive noise, careless land development.
Superfund is kind of a catch-all term, and it all goes back to 1980 when Congress passed a law with the acronym is CERCLA. I won't even try and tell you what that means. But basically it was that polluters were going to pay, whether they were miners or industrialists or whoever, and that if they couldn't, that the Environmental Protection Agency would step in and help out with the cleanup.
Superfunds usually are not very quick and expensive. Very, very expensive. There's usually a history there, often with some sort of like an industry, mining, I'd say contaminated, like heavy metals, water quality, groundwater, time. Like they're very timely, they can take decades and decades.
The first words I think of are hidden, hazardous, human health, and generational.
I was part of a Forest Service team that examined the Forest Service portion of the Alder mine because a small portion of the mine actually was located on public land. The Forest Service is required to do a site investigation and a preliminary assessment to see if any of the parts on the Forest Service were contributing to the overall environmental degradation that took place at the Alder. I took water samples myself at the bottom of the mine where the acid rock drainage emerged into Alder Creek. And what we found was what you would expect. There were high concentrations of heavy metals, which means zinc, lead, copper, cadmium, and that they were being introduced by the mine workings into Alder Creek.
Copper is a particularly cumbersome one, even though because biologically it's a trace mineral that we need, but trace mineral, we don't need it in a bunch. However, it is really detrimental to fish, which is a lot of like what my studies were looking at. So these areas called slickens, which are just really super saturated with heavy metals, and they're by riverbanks. And naturally capillary action of water brings those metals and salts to the top, and then they wick off into the waterway when it rains or sloughs off. Well, copper in the water, if it gets above, it's a very minimal level, it'll just suffocate fish and they die. It happens usually, unfortunately, like a couple times a year. You can look at them in the Montana newspaper and there'll just be massive fish kills. And they don't ever usually want to specifically say why, because liability and PR and all these things that revolve around it.
I moved out west after school and discovered that a lot more Superfund sites exist out here. As I worked my way into conservation and advocacy, I learned about Superfund sites that affect rivers primarily. I learned about and worked with areas that were contaminated from past mining activities, and again, areas where people who are disadvantaged end up being impacted more than ordinary folks just living their lives. So it's one of those things that just kind of exists beneath the surface.
I don't know the statistics, but I know intuitively that the place where we as a society and the people that manufacture chemicals tend to put the waste in places where there are people who are less advantaged. Lower income neighborhoods, sometimes people have to be moved out of neighborhoods for companies to conduct their operations, but those people tend to have less of a voice in saying where they want things to be sited and being heard by their elected representatives. So I think it's clearly an environmental justice issue. First of all, Methow Valley Citizens Council. We started in 1976, and we came together around the idea that people who live in a place should have a voice to advocate on behalf of the place that they care most about. We are an environmental advocacy organization, and we've taken on a number of big issues. Probably we're best known for really launching the effort when There was a proposal for an international scale downhill ski resort here in the Methow Valley. So meanwhile, as the valley grew, more people came here, and virtually everyone who comes here has a story to tell about why they came here, because they love this place. And so in 2014, there was a Canadian company that proposed some new exploratory drilling up on Flag Mountain, which is just above the little town of Mazama. And there was a known copper deposit up there. It had been known for a long time, but this company wanted to go back in and explore that opportunity for a industrial scale open pit copper mine. One particular meeting that happened in the Red Barn in, I believe it was November, almost 400 people, they were hanging from the rafters in the barn. The people said, we want to convene together, we want to hear each other's questions. One after another, it went on for quite some time, but people stood up, and what impressed me was the depth, the quality of the comments. It wasn't just, we don't want an open pit copper mine. It was people speaking with really specifically about what they thought was at risk, and it included, of course, water, air, wildlife, the whole range of issues.
The thing about abandoned mine sites is people tend to look at the dirt and the hole and see those things and say, oh, well, that's a problem. In reality, there are invisible risks. And those are the risks mostly to the water, because the chemicals in the water, the heavy metals specifically in the water, can have dramatic effects on their local environment and even further downstream, particularly to the aquatic resources that we treasure so much here, our salmon populations and that sort of thing.
In our own region here in Okanagan County and in North Central Washington, and through working with you as an intern, I think we've discovered that even though not all of the sites around here are labeled as Superfund or qualified, there's still a lot of contamination left over from old orchard lands and old mining activities, either mining itself or the milling of the minerals. And we're still dealing with those today, especially as the region grows and people want to move here and are not aware of some of these contaminated sites.
If there's one thing I've learned, is that that advocacy requires persistence. There's my favorite quote in this realm is from a hero in the movement of mine, a man named Brock Evans, who said, "What is required in this work is endless pressure, endlessly applied." And that's certainly the case for Superfund sites, because of, just those are mostly forever chemicals, right? And we have to keep dealing with